creative space, I feel like I should have candlelight and low lights and mood music because of who my guest is today. This is Antiguan and Barbudan writer Kimolisa Mings, who is a prolific writer of both romance and erotica, and she will tell us what the difference is between those two. I've been reading what I think is some of her erotica, and I can tell you it's hot. But so we don't have the lowlights and all that, but you will get the links to her books and so on, and you can do that on your own time. But I want her today to tell us about how she got into romance writing and all the ins and outs. And if you hang around, she's also going to give us a little exercise to jumpstart our own writing. So thanks for being with me today, Kimolisa.
Oh, thank you for having me. It all started with a story, and you had edited it actually. That was the Little Red Hoodie. And then I got into
Little Red Hoodie was a fable, which was a rewrite of Little Red Riding Hood.
Yes. Yeah. So I started there, and then I just, all of a sudden, I guess I was bitten by the the writing bug. And I started writing longer form fiction.
Because before that, you were primarily a poet.
Yes. So I started there, and I didn't really decide on what I was going to write, but I did something that you would say is more like a family-centered story, which was Martine. And then I found erotica interesting, and I created something called Saving Babylon. But then I decided on romance because it's a genre that a lot of people read, and there's so many subgenres that I thought, you know what, I can probably find something and just have fun with it, because I like the idea of choosing a particular genre and going deep and just being constrained and yet finding interesting ways of telling a story.
So how many romance books have you written, and how many subgenres have you experimented with?
Well, I've written, because the thing is, I've done short stories. Yeah, I've done short stories, and I've done, I had started out in the genre of BWWM, which is Black Woman, White Man Romance, because I saw that that was a little niche in the romance genre. So I think I have a series of 4, and then I think I have 3 stories separate from that. One was Western, one was contemporary. Contemporary slash, I consider it like a step away from the billionaire romance, where it's like the reluctant, that's how I put it, a reluctant billionaire romance. And I did the Western reluctant billionaire romance and contemporary.
Okay, so while you're thinking, listener, let the record show that if you ask me how many books I've written, I can tell you 7, because it's a very small number. She's written so many books. She's like, I think I wrote, and I'm like, oh my God, how is that even possible?
To be honest, there were times where I'm like, I've thought of myself as kind of lazy, because there are times when I was just like, you should be writing. So, and there was a big jump from, because I had decided on doing the series, Sapodilla Resort and Spa series, and there was a two-year span between them when they shouldn't have, but just decided that there's just so many stories that come up in my mind that I'm like, you know what, I gotta get them out.
Okay, so now people think of romance as boy meets girl, boy loses girl. That's kind of the old template, boy gets girl. I know there's many variations of that, especially now. It doesn't have to be boy girl, it can be boy boy, it can be a girl girl, all kinds of things. But how do you keep it interesting within the sort of they have to get together? How do you keep it interesting for yourself? Because you know where it's going to end up. Because part of writing for me is discovering where it's going. But you kind of, with romance, you kind of know where it's going to end up. Yes?
Right. Yes. Yeah.
So how do you keep it interesting for yourself?
Well, for one, and that's why I think of this as a journey, because I when I started, I was just like, you know what, I'm just going to write whatever and let the story unfold. And in some instances, I'm like, oh, wow, this is where this is going. But then I decided, okay, let me learn storytelling. And I understood, okay, the different beats, the different mechanics of it. And I think I even had taken a workshop on character development, because with one of my books, my friends and my sister said, yeah, I hated the female character. So I was like, okay, I put it out, I learned, I decided, okay, I'm going to work on that. And I got better with each book. And it was just a matter of, at one instant, I recognized, okay, let me try outlining. But then what I realized with outlining is that sometimes it felt like I already wrote the book. And in some instances, when I was doing the outline, I was writing the book. But then the thing is that in some instances, you can have the outline, but sometimes the story decides it wants to go somewhere else. And sometimes I feel like, okay, let me constrain it, but then no, just let it go. Let it just evolve. And it's, in some instances, it is better to just let it.
Something you just said about the female characters, character likability. I have a pet peeve about that, because I've gotten that too. To me, there's a difference between a badly written character and a character who is intentionally bad, or a character who is intentionally complex, or a character who is like a character doesn't have to be likable.
Right.
Unlikable character, let me put it this way, is not necessarily a badly written character.
Right.
So
right.
how do you navigate that? Does a woman in the romance novel always have to be likable, or are we talking about she wasn't constructed in a way
I think it was
the construction of her?
Yeah, I believe that. And I felt like now with what I know, I don't think I had a clear idea of, I didn't make her complex. So now I have that as an understanding. That's what I move forward with, as opposed to, you know what, everybody loves her. She pets all animals. She saves all the sick and
She's
the
impossible.
destitute.
She's impossible.
Right.
I mean, those characters are impossible. They don't exist, right? I mean, maybe in a nunnery or something, but perfect people don't exist. And women, I don't know, sometimes I find that women in fiction, women on the page, are expected to be a best friend when they're just trying to be people navigating their lives, you know?
Right.
I find that go ahead.
And that's where I find it interesting, because like more than one occasion I've seen in the reviews where people said, you know, this is real, these characters are real. And sometimes I wonder, is like, but aren't they always like realistic people that people will see on the like would interact with in the day-to-day? And as you said, they're, in some instances they're not. They're trying to create this idealized person and situation where sometimes it's just nice to see yourself in those spaces, and that we are complex, we have our own
and I tend to enjoy writing what I call messy women, and by messy I mean they're just human, you know, allowed the same privilege that the other gender have to be human. Which is one of the things with your book, with your story in the Kinky Caribbean series. Oh my God, I'm forgetting the name, but she has a fake husband. What's the name?
Seducing
my fake husband.
Yeah.
What I like about her is that she's unapologetic about what she wants.
Yeah.
Right? She breaks the rules of their entanglement, and she goes after what she wants, and to me in a bold and interesting way. I mean, and she is at the same time, there's no mistaking that the story is specifically Caribbean.
Right. Yeah.
Is that important to you? Anything that I just said you want to pick up on?
Yeah, right now, that's the direction I want to go with my writing, where I want it to be a small Caribbean island. I want it to be genre fiction, category romance in the Caribbean, because that's sometimes those are the books you want to read. You know, you don't want to be thinking of the heavier, like literary fiction or whatever. Sometimes you just want ice cream. And
Yeah.
that's what the kind of books I want to write.
Sometimes you just
You
want a
know,
mimosa and to sit and watch the sunset.
right.
On
You know?
Redonda, because here's a bit of fantasy about your work. Redonda is this fully realized place. I'm like, oh, Redonda, like I like that. I like that you
Yeah.
what it does as well is that it frees you from the constraints of the Antigua-ness of it while keeping it Antiguan or Caribbean, is my
Right.
interpretation of it.
Yes, definitely. Because actually I created Redonda for the only well, no, the second mystery I had done, which was set in Redonda, Into the Black Widow's Web. And I felt like it gave me a lot of freedom because it's so easy for people to, if it's Antigua, it's so easy to like be looking for
Yes,
the Antiguan Easter eggs.
I
And
know. I
it's
know.
just like,
I know
that's
from
not right.
experience. Yeah.
But then even over the weekend, I had come across an article, and it was the perspective of an English person, an older English man who comes to Antigua on a regular, at least once a year. And it was his perspective of the elections, because he had come the very same day as the big ABLP motorcade. And
Okay.
it was his perspective of being caught in it and his perspective of the Caribbean, of Antigua and its elections. And there were times when I was just like kind of fact checking his article to the point where I don't send emails to the editors, but you know what, there were some things.
Yeah.
And but then it's his perspective.
And it's kind of something that's hard to resist when you know the landscape. Since we're talking about romance, I'll reference, for instance, I was a producer on Antigua's first feature-length film, The Sweetest Mango. And I know there was times when people were like, well, would you take from that long to get from there to the airport? And I'm like, no, you're using the space to create a land in a fictional Antigua in which it does take that distance to get from there to there. Like suspend your disbelief and just step into the world of the story. And I think with the Redonda, you give the people the freedom to do that and not think about our roads here without forgetting our roads here, because you talk about in the second story that I was reading, you talk about some of the practicalities on the ground in Antigua, you know, the imported car from Japan, the taking the bus, the whole thing. So you get that groundedness, but it doesn't have to be, you know, Old Road or Sweets or New Introps or wherever. So I thought that was an interesting thing.
Yeah. And there's just that, as I said, there is that freedom because you can get bogged down with the pinpointing and you don't want to. And the other thing, what I realize is that another small island person can like see themselves in it, because I think in another review, somebody's like, yeah, you can almost see this particular person as a specific person in their island. I think they refer to stewards, whereas it's a resort owner. So we all, and small island people, have similar things. It's just on their island. And we think we're the only ones that have it. But it's basically a little different accent, different landmarks, but in some cases it's all the same.
And do you find, or do you care whether how it translates beyond the Caribbean?
I'm still unsure about that because I
Unsure
have
if
to
unsure if it is, or unsure if you care.
Unsure if I care because how do I put it? I am aware that in a way, it's a numbers game because here we are, we have the Caribbean, but then we have so many people who are readers in the Caribbean. So to say I'm going to market to this fraction only, it's a small group. But if I look at it as I tell this Caribbean story, but then I also market it as something that others outside can recognize. So it could be a friends to lovers story. It could be a Cinderella story where it's somebody is experiencing something that they're not used to. So, but it's all set in the Caribbean. And in a way, maybe by doing that, people from elsewhere can see that there's more to the Caribbean.
But all of your stories are not set in the Caribbean, are they?
My previous stories, they were a generic American place, city.
Was that intentional?
At the time, yes, because I think it was aiming at a particular market and more as like African American or people, as I said, the BWW, Black women, white man romances. It was with that as the vehicle, but now it's just having fun and redundant now.
What shifted that for you, if anything? Or is it just the space where you are now and you might go back to writing broader pieces?
I think actually I have to credit a friend because one day she was just like, but why don't you write stories set in the Caribbean? You know, and I was just, at the time, I don't even remember where I was or what I was writing, but then I thought, okay, why don't I? So it was just a little bit after I had finished reading a book on the craft, and I was like, okay, let me try out these techniques in this book, and that became Into the Black Widow's Web. And I found it like, okay, this was kind of nice. Let me continue.
You know, I have a theory that because I think we all start off writing broader before we get specific, because so much of what we read growing up in the Caribbean, ironically enough, that's my theory anyway, is from, so you kind of learn what story is, reading stories from other places, and then you kind of have to come to this realization, hey, we have stories too, and they're kind of interesting. Lots and lots of stories. So yeah. I'm not surprised that you ventured into romance because I was introduced to your poetry first, and your poetry, I'm not saying your poetry was all about romance, but your poetry always had this romantic essence to it. I liked your book, She Wanted a Love Poem. Is that the correct title?
Yep.
And how you constructed atmosphere. I mean, the verse, obviously, but the atmosphere building in that, like, it wasn't a hop and a leap, a huge chasm to writing romance, in my opinion, reading your poetry. Do you see that transition as being natural for you?
Yeah, because I just found it easier. Although I read almost everything, and I wanted to start reading a little bit more fantasy, I find romance, it speaks to the feelings, it speaks to your internal conflict, and I recognize that I can be a highly anxious in my head kind of person, and that lends itself to it. And it's just, I just feel comfortable in that genre. And although
you've also done fantasy romance, yes? Like
no, I did a little bit of sci-fi.
Yes.
But then when I went and explored what sci-fi was, I realized, oh, okay, it's part of a genre, but it's not a defined genre. Whereas what I noticed with some of when I was doing the research in romance, in sci-fi romance, there was just a lot of aliens. And you know what, almost everything was my alien. And basically there were humanoid aliens.
And let me get, and you had no interest in aliens? Is that what you're saying?
Well, the thing is, like, my alien was more of a truth speaker than somebody that they interacted with. So that's when at the time, I thought I was doing space opera, but no, I wasn't. I was just doing a straight up romance between humans in this fantastical world.
But did you blush at all when you were writing the erotica, is the question. It's kind of, yeah.
Not really. You know what it was? it's when you burn yourself out on erotica.
Yeah.
Because when I finished the last Kinky Caribbean, and I must say that last one, I think it was more steamy romance than erotica.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just like tired because I was like, I have those 12 short stories, and then I have 6 stories before that, which was part of the Eros, what I call Eros, but it's actually the Bacchanal Suite, Bacchanal Ton-Up stories. And by that time, I was just like, you know what? I'm done for a while. I'm tired of sex. Let me just, to be honest, let me put it this way. There is a sex scene in the last book I had put out, which is His Last Wish. And I didn't even write it when I wrote the full story. All I had was sex scene. And I continued.
So you were getting bored with it?
Yeah. Because the thing is, like, this year was supposed to even have Kinky Caribbean Taboo, where it was just like, let us just go buck wild. Let's have multiples, because I think that last Kinky Caribbean kind of alludes to swingers clubs and swing groups. I was thinking like quasi incest. I was thinking like a jail warden thing, a prison guard who samples the prisoners.
Oh wow!
I had the stories, but I was just like, that's hard.
Nervous, but I hope you're not too tired to walk us through a writing exercise, because I do want to get a sense of how you do it. So if you have an exercise that you want, if you have an exercise that you want to, whether it doesn't have to be erotica, whatever it is, I ask you to give us an exercise that we can try at home, so to speak.
Okay. So something you can try is in the same thing, whereas for romance, choose a character and have something that she would want and values that she would have. And from there, you can develop her romantic other, whereas he can be the flip side of it. So you can have a story that I haven't really fleshed out would be this, well, let's see. Okay, where you have this teacher. She is kind of like, she says what she says. She would want to do more, but she has student loans. She wants to pay them up. And on the opposite side, you have this laissez-faire teacher who is creating edibles. And you have that conflict because she has her high morals, he's easygoing, but there's an attraction between them. And part of the story is making it work, as well as they may have opposing ideas and they believe that their idea is the one that works, but throughout the story, they find a middle ground that actually works for both of them.
So you find that romance is often built on those warring intentions.
Yeah, in some instances, because that's what kind of makes it spicy. That's what makes it like this contention, and sometimes that's what creates these witty dialogues and the pining and all of those things that make it interesting. And another thing is like what I had read recently is in some instances, people just want what they know, but what a person can do is just take a known trope or genre and just amp it up, or you can just add something from another genre.
So how do you know something is a series? Because you've done quite a few series.
Well, the first series, it was supposed to be 3 and it ended up being 4, but then it was a situation of seeing what was in the market and recognizing that people didn't want those cliffhangers. So what I decided is that if I'm going to write a series, it would be in the same world, but a complete storyline. So it can have an underlying, like the same location, the same island, in some cases, it would be like a small town and everything is happening in this small town, but it's a different story, a complete story. So that if somebody starts with one, they would want to continue reading the others. And that's the reason why I chose to go with series.
Yeah. And do you write them all at once or?
Yeah, well, no, before when I had done the 4 books, I had done it all at once, but then now I'm just doing the stories one at a time and then put them out as they're completed.
I'm actually asking because there were actually 2 of my books that I thought there was more to tell, but I found that by the time it was to go back to it, I wasn't there anymore. So I wonder sometimes if it's not better to just do it all at once and then, I guess you could break it like whatever.
If it's like one continuous story that's one after the other, it's sequential, definitely, because the worst thing that can happen is that you have the wrong name or you have the wrong eye color or body type.
Because you're not in the world like that anymore. The world of the story.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes when you're so far out of it, it's just hard to get back in.
Yeah, believe me, I know. So, okay, if someone wanted to start reading one of Kimolisa's many books, many books, where would they start? Like, what is the book we need to start with?
Well, you know what? Right now, I would just say try something light. I've got a couple free books, one of which is At Last. That is just like a short story, short, sweet romance. And you can jump in anywhere, honestly, and just sample it, because I'm still in this journey and still evolving, basically.
Well, it's an impressive evolution, I gotta tell you, because writing one book is not easy. And you don't seem to have lost your appetite for it, and you don't seem to have lost your energy. I know you say sometimes you think you're being lazy or whatever, but I don't see it. You keep producing. So kudos to you for that.
Let's just say let me see, that series has 3. There's The Politician's Baby. There's one I'm working. I want to do a Caribbean princess like Queen trilogy. So that's just like 9 already. Yeah. And there's a friend, there's like my brother's friend kind of romance there too. So it's like they haunt you. They're like, hey,
write me.
And then they would come up with like little scenes in my head and like, yo, I'm busy over here, or I have work that I have to do, so.
Do you ever write, what's the word? You ever write in different plot lines simultaneously, like you're working on this series at the same time you're working on that, or you one at a time consecutively?
One at a time, yeah.
Right, so it's happening pretty quickly then. How long does it take you to get through one?
It's hard to say, and I would like to test it because, as I said, it's just to sit down and do the work. And I never really paid attention, as I never really depended heavily on an outline, or I'm not writing consistently. It's hard to say. So it's something I want to do, just like be able to track it.
So I was going to end by asking you to give tips, but you just said, just sit down and do the work. That sounds like the best tip right there. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I would say definitely what I had read, where it's like you take a particular story that people know and transcend it. I would say, yeah, you'd have to sit down and do the work, because sometimes you might be like constantly editing it in your head, but it's just easier to just put it all down, and then there's rewrites. So you have this block of text. It's like a bit of clay, bit of marble, and you just chisel away until you get what you want, or something close to what you want, because sometimes you put something out and it's like, I could have fixed it more.